Good afternoon, everybody. In my madness of getting this house ready and all my modeling and acting stuff and for working out because it calms me down and it's kind of important for my job. I mean very. I'm going to be back to videos, except for obviously when things come up out of the blue, which they constantly do. But I have an important one today because occasionally I like to talk about politics. And this is an important thing to explain. Whether you're progressive or conservative, if you're basically, this is an important video to listen to for anyone of any political persuasion, unless you're, one of the four people that are literally like, woo, status quo, status quo. And if you're not a white baby boomer, I don't see how that's possible, because the establishment, they care about two groups of people. The 1%, regardless of your age, your race, your creed, whatever. If you're a 1%er, they like you. And if you're not, then you better be a white baby boomer, which I'm not. So, what am I going to talk about? Taxes. Conservatives are getting worried, but you shouldn't be, because conservatives are right. We need to lower taxes, especially on small businesses. But conservatives, mainly Trump, are wrong too, because we need more tax brackets, not less. It'll make sense. Follow through. Now, I got to explain something real quick, how taxes work in the United States. Again, if you're not in the United States, I don't know really how taxes work in your country. Maybe one day I'll learn how they work in the UK, because, maybe I'll be good enough to be a model in London, because New York don't like me so much. And I can't really act, but hey, London, if there's ever like a small role in something where you need a guy who looks and sounds like an Italian American mobster, and it's not, and the accent's real, by the way. So, there's that. But I want to explain how taxes work in the United States. We're talking federal taxes here. And it's called progressive taxation. I know, calm down, conservative, doesn't mean what you think. So there's this misnomer about taxes. And I'm going to make up my own numbers, and they're all going to end in 0 or 5, because we're going to keep this simple. This is for demonstrational purposes, the exact numbers. They're approximations. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it's important to know that these tax rates, as they progress, it's the rate after. It's when you cross that barrier, it kicks in. It's not cumulative. For example, let's say somebody doing pretty well for themselves, they're making, 500 grand. And let's say the top tax rate as it stands now, is 35%, and that kicks in after 300,000. So you got somebody making, $500,000, 500,000. So they're going to cross into that top tax rate of 35%. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, that's 35% of their, that's over a third of their money right there. No, because that's not how the taxation works. So if somebody makes $500,000 and they cross that, what is now the top barrier, it's always between like 35 and 39. The Republicans keep it around 35, Democrats keep it at 39, but it's not important right now. What's important is the fact that once you cross that barrier, it's not retroactive, meaning if you're making $500,000, only that money above 300,000, which is the threshold for that level, is taxed at the 35% rate. So that same person who makes $500,000, they pay the same rate of tax on, the first 50,000 as the guy who only makes 50,000. You get it? So let's say the rate at 50,000 is 20%. So, the guy making $500,000 and the guy making 50,000 are both paying 20% on the money, that goes up to 50,000, then it goes above there, meaning that to be taxed at that higher rate, it's only for money beyond where that rate kicks in, which brings up my point. I'll give one more example first, because this leads into my point. So, small businesses are important. We can't sock it to them, because we actually need small businesses to grow. We need more of them. We need innovation. But unfortunately, from every president, Republican or Democrat, from Reagan to present, has been a hardcore corporatist and hasn't enforced this great thing we still have on the books called the Sherman Antitrust Act that was put into place in the early 1900s. Was it Taft or it might have been Teddy Roosevelt? It was a Bull Moose Republican who did it. We need Bull Moose Republicans back. Or better yet, Eisenhower Republicans. And Ross Perot tried to bring that back, and we'll get into another video about how we need a third-party candidate and we need the compromise. But this is about taxes. So let's say, we're still in that same thing where 300,000, 35%, and that's the ceiling. Doesn't make sense, does it? And here's why. So let's say somebody makes $1 million. Should they have a higher rate at some point than 35%? Nah, that's easily a small business. But let's go to somebody who makes $40 million a year. Is that a small business guy? No. So I think it would be reasonable to, and this is why I use the number 35%. Let's agree, progressives, with the Republicans and lower that rate on what would be considered in today's money upper middle class, which incorporates a lot of small business owners. So we'll leave that at 35 where the Republicans want it. But here's where things need to change and why we need more brackets. It is not the 1%, the small business owners that aren't paying their fair share. It is the 0.1%, the oligarch class, the very class of people that Jefferson warned about in his writings, about people accumulating so much wealth that they become a threat to democracy. And honestly, they wouldn't be a threat to democracy if, we didn't have legalized bribery in this country. I respect people I disagree with if they are consistent and true believers. Like a lot Rick Santorum says that I don't like. He's very theocratic. But at least I give him credit on the fact that he's a true believer. He's not like playing a role. He's not a hypocrite from what I can tell. Whereas like someone I disagree with like Rush Limbaugh would be, drug dealers need to spend as most time in jail as there can be. No tolerance on drug use except me. Because, he was an oxy head, which was okay for him because he's in the club. Now, if you want to be a hard ass, that's fine. But, that has to apply to like you and your kids too. It's not, but I'm me. Yeah, telling of the, people need to work more and they're lazy. Pull them up by your bootstraps. Says the guy whose parents were lawyers. But anyway, enough about him. He's dead. So, let's go back to taxes. Now, isn't it logical that there should be more brackets on the high end? Again, let's lower it from where it is today under Biden for the small business owners. People making $500,000, people making $1 million. Hell, let's just say up to 10. I think once we cross the barrier of 10 million a year, we're no longer in small business territory. We're not talking about the small business owner. So maybe, if the rate is 35% at roughly 300,000, let's say at 10 million it goes to 40. Okay? Fair enough. Now we're getting into like professional athletes and celebrities, the people you want to pay more, Republicans. Don't you want the people in California to pay more? And, they're not really creating jobs either. I'll get into a Ross Perot point a little bit. And so on. So 45% over 10 million. And I think it's fair to say go to 50 over 100 million. Now you are in the 0.1%. They can certainly afford to pay their fair share, a few more percent. And again, I want to reiterate, for those of you that may be thinking, well, if someone's making $120 million a year, under what you're saying, the federal government's going to take half of it right then and there. No. See, the 50%, the person making $120 million, they would not be taxed at 50% for $120 million. $20 million would be taxed at 120% once they break that threshold of $100 million. You get it? Like up to $10,000, I think you pay nothing, and you know what I mean? What you pay no matter how much you make. Even that guy making $120 million, he's paying the same rate on the first 60 as the guy who's only making 60. Get it? Now, my larger point. Again, and we can talk about lowering, of course, lowering the rates as they are on the middle class. I'm even talking about lowering it on the upper middle class, the small business owners. We're getting into, like, where I'm talking about higher rates is for people that are really raking it in a system that is rigged and has been rigged for a long time. But that's for another video where I talk about legalized bribery and campaign finance reform and buying elections. Brief point about Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is slimy. I know some conservatives like a lot of his points, but there's this one slimy thing that he does where he talks about, he's like, the Democrats want to limit free speech, man. And it's in reference to the Democrats saying that we need campaign finance reform. And they're corrupt too. These are the establishment Democrats. They just want dark money out. But even Ted Cruz is against that. Money speech, man. Okay. But also, Ted Cruz, who is intelligent and is a lawyer, he's just a true Kool-Aid drinker. Ted Cruz would say, you're wrong. So you say someone like me. Let's say you're somebody like me, and you always wanted to be a firefighter. And it's highly competitive to become a firefighter because cutbacks always affect the fire department first in any area. You can't go into your chief's interview at the end of the testing process, for those of you that are familiar with civil service processes, and hand the chief $5,000 and say, well, that's my speech. That's just my speech of telling you how I'm the best candidate. But in campaign, when you give a candidate money, it's not a quid pro quo. Apparently, that's just their speech of saying they're the best candidate. See, it can't be both. And also, Ted Cruz is right when he says the Clinton Foundation is pay to play corruption, but so are super PACs. You know what I mean? What side are you on? It's not, it's bad when those guys do it, but it's okay when my team does it. You can't. There's no integrity in that. Which is why, why I don't agree with this solution. People like, who was the libertarian in 2016? Johnson. I can't think of his first name. The former governor. Johnson and Rand Paul and Ron Paul all said, well, you should be allowed to give as much money to a candidate as you want. But them as libertarians, there's at least some consistency. There should be full transparency. In other words, it should be public knowledge of, like, if Halliburton gave you, $1.5 million, anybody should be able to see that. Hell, Johnson even said that candidates should be wearing, like, NASCAR jackets with all the logos on them. So, at least, therefore, transparency. So, at least, any voter would know who gave them money and how much. I don't agree with that, but it's a respectable position. There's transparency there. They're not hiding it. So that's better than what we have now anyway. Moving on to this big point. I'll try to wrap it up soon. I know I drone on and on and on. But let's talk about Social Security. Now, tell me how this is fair. Well, some of you will think maybe it was, but let's just lay it out this way. Social Security in trouble, need money, popular program, blah, 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 blah. We know all that. I'm not going to throw platitudes at you. And I'm going to give some arbitrary numbers. But wouldn't it be fair if everybody pays for it? Now, as it sits now, people who make over $300,000, roughly, this is a rough estimate number, but it's somewhere in there. It's, somewhere between there and maybe $500,000. They don't pay Social Security tax on any money above that. Now, how's that fair? So, the police officer, or let's say the police captain who makes $100,000 a year, he pays, we're just going to use 2% as an example, 2% of his salary on 100% of his salary for Social Security. But, the hedge fund manager or the actor or the hockey player, they only have to pay to, say, $300,000. I don't think that's fair. I think they should pay the same. Now, I'm not saying they should pay a higher rate. I'm saying, if we're using the number 2%, if you're paying 2% on all of your income, as am I think they should pay 2% on all of theirs, be it 10 million, 50 million, the same rate that everybody else pays. Just tax the whole way through, and that would make the problem solving. Is there not a better example of how the rich can pay to get the policies they want? Because I don't care, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Christian, Jewish, atheist, what middle class person is fighting for, you know what, I want to make sure that people like Hillary Clinton and Alec Baldwin don't have to pay Social Security tax on all their millions they make every year. That's not fair to them. Who's fighting for that other than the small minority of people that it benefits, that are pouring money into our corrupt oligarchic system? Think about that. And to change that, again, we're not saying, oh, you're rich, you have to pay 5% of your salary, to Social Security. It's like, no, I'm paying 2% on 100% of mine. He's paying 2% on 100% of his. She's paying 2% on 100% of her, the nurse, him, the firefighter, even him, the lawyer. So why shouldn't, the hedge fund manager, the actor, the rock star, the oil baron do the same? Same rate, just, 100. That seems like a no-brainer to me. But in any of the things I spoke about, I suggest you do your own research. And a lot of what I'm saying, this isn't, by the way, I'm not talking communism or socialism. I'm talking demand-side capitalism. Think Dwight Eisenhower. Think JFK. That time where we had the economic expansion and the middle class that was the envy of the world. Yeah. So these policies obviously work. And it's pretty damn stable. Not many people, I'm not going to say they don't exist, not many people are advocating for communism. Demand-side capitalism's like, there should be upward mobility and a meritocracy, not an oligarchy or a good old boys club. Got to reel in nepotism and all that too. But it's saying, the American dream is, let's say, somebody working hard in a factory, making a decent union wage and being able to support their family. Like, they talk about family values. Well, that's harder and harder because a lot of times both parents have to work because unions have been so beat down and wages are suppressed, and because we have an oligarchy and the middle class and the working class never get what they want because they're always serving their donors and the rich, which has only gotten worse over years thanks to things like Citizens United, which basically says money is not even the appearance of speech unless you try to give a fire chief $5,000 and say, I'm the best candidate for the job. Then it's bribery. But when they do it to get a big tax cut, it's okay. See? Rules for thee, not for ye. Yes. So, to my point, this has been tried and true. If you want to hear a more eloquent example of everything I'm talking about, and it's very interesting, you can hear what I'm talking about essentially versus neoconservative corporatism and neoliberal corporatism. I'm of course talking about the 1992 presidential debates. I'm taking the Perot position because I think it made sense, and I think somebody with that ideology can potentially unite, the non-establishment right and the non-establishment left with a reasonable compromise to finally break that. You can either have the new Reagan or the new Bill Clinton. And you get the same pretty much either way. Little changes here and there. Basically who they're bought by. Who's going to get a little bit of a tax cut. Maybe. So, I think, this makes the most sense, and it's been tested and it's doable. And remember, we have the numbers. We need to come together. Those of us that, if agree on nothing else, want to break the status quo. And I'll end on this. Anybody, now if you don't agree with this, please tell me. And tell me why, because I want to know. Because it has nothing to do with policy. Regardless of your political affiliation or your political beliefs, can we all band together and tell politicians, call them out when they try to spew platitudes and say, no, tell me what you believe in detail. Because love or hate Bernie Sanders, he does that. Love or hate Rand Paul, he does that. They work together. See, that's part of my thing too, is if is if a democratic socialist and a libertarian can agree on certain things and work together, so can the rest of us. But we need to get out the, gonna make America great again. What does that mean? He's gonna make America great again. How? And it's no different from, the strength of American ingenuity. All right, where's my interns? It's the same on either side. Vapid platitudes that for some reason, a lot of the boomer generation, but it means nothing. It's just tribalism. Enough empty suits. Marco Rubio in 2016. That's what we need to get rid of. I think, even if I completely disagree with you, like Rick Santorum, it's like, at least I know what you're for. Bernie on the other side does the same thing. Whether you hate his policies, you know where he stands. He's not, trying to play both sides like Hillary. I'm a progressive. If you say I'm a moderate, I plead guilty, depending on, Bernie's positions don't change based on who he's talking to. And they haven't changed in at least 20 years, because there's this great speech where he rails against the Bush tax cuts. So, yeah, remember, capitalism and trickle-down economics, voodoo economics, Reaganomics, whatever you want to call it, are not mutually exclusive. You can have, and more successfully, I might add, have capitalism without doing supply side or the Laffer curve and all that. We did it for a long time, and it worked. Because if you're saying, well, we can't do anything about the Laffer curve and voodoo economics and what Reagan did, then by that definition, if getting rid of that would be communism, then you're calling President Eisenhower, the war hero, the general, a communist. Because what I'm talking about, he had policies very, very, very similar to that. And it was a very prosperous time, as it was under JFK. We had policies like that from FDR. Clear through actually the first term of Reagan, because Reagan had 2 big tax cuts. And yes, there are times when tax cuts help make a boom, but you can go too far. Reagan in the first term lowered the top tax rate to roughly 50%, where it was demand side like down to the bone. And then when he put it to 28 and deregulated too much, S&L crisis, things like that happen. Some regulations make sense, like the Sherman Antitrust Act. I want to see I want to see towns have their own family-owned hardware store and things like that, grocery stores. I don't want to see just Walmart and Home Depot and monopolies like that, because it's not able for the little guys to compete, because the game is so rigged based on all the legalized bribery. And of course, people should all pay their fair share. And if you're socking the taxes to the guy, or the girl in running the small business, well, then that business goes under and the people who work for them suffer too. But, don't think like, oh yeah, the guy making $300,000, he should pay the same tax rate as the guy making $50 million. It's like, no, the $50 million guy needs to pay a little more. He's not creating jobs, because, as Perot said, people who don't make anything can't buy anything. In other words, if you cut the taxes on, the carpenter, you say he gets $4,000 more a year because of his tax return, he's going to spend that money. It's going to go back in the economy and create demand in various places and thus create jobs. If the person who's insanely wealthy, let's say, the actor who made $35 million that year, if you cut his taxes and he now takes home, another $1.5 million, it's just going in an offshore bank account. Same with the hedge fund manager, the banker. Doesn't go in the economy. Doesn't trickle down. They just hoard more. Get it? So, hopefully that was helpful. Do your own research, especially when it comes to how the progressive taxation works. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. Call your congressman. I implore you to do so, because they work for us and you have every right to bother them. But I'll do videos like this occasionally. I'm going to try to bring this idea together. Again, It's going to require compromise. Go back, watch the 92 debates, watch Ross Perot's infomercial things where he lays out, look here at this chart, all that he believed, and see how much common sense it is. And in some areas, he's conservative. In some areas, he's progressive. He's very much, like what President Eisenhower was. But I think economically, social issues are another different story. Economically, I think those that want to break from the status quo can compromise if we can get a third-party candidate similar to Ross Perot. Because Perot got 19% of the vote, and contrary to what they try to say, he calls Bush the off. No, he got equally from Republicans and Democrats because there were a lot of Republicans who didn't like Bush. But there were also a lot of Democrats, particularly Union Democrats, that voted for Perot because his big thing was, I will stop NAFTA. I will not let them ship your job to Mexico. Giant sucking sound. So he took equally from both. Because bipartisanship, when it's the corporatists together, bad things happen. Like NAFTA, like the Iraq War. Keep that in mind. And that, at the heart of it, is our problem. It's corporatism. I know a lot on the right try to say, this is their buzzword. They're communists, because that's like a Pavlovian hit the pedal response. Or baby boomers like, oh, I'm frightened. And the neoliberal left, like on MSNBC, do it too. Like Maddow, Russia, the Russia investigation, and Sean Hannity screams, communist, and it gets people of that generation all scared and nostalgic at the same time, and they love that. But it's a buzzword, because communism, simplified, is state control of business, which is not the problem we have. Our problem is business control of the state. In other words, big business has bought the government. That's corporatism. Get it? So, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you made it to the end. Please share this video. It's important. I know I drone on and on, but I tried to be as entertaining as I possibly can.